Having walked through all of The Last of Us Part 1 and Left Behind on Grounded, I'm making this video now to talk about the differences between The Last of Us Part 1 as a game and its sequel, The Last of Us Part 2. And the reason I'm doing that is because a lot of people who do challenge runs or play Grounded difficulty play Last of Us Part 2 a lot more than The Last of Us Part 1. And they also kind of, in many cases, are put off from The Last of Us Part 1 because they don't think that the combat and gameplay is as good as The Last of Us Part 2, and particularly the lack of dodge and prone in Last of Us Part 1 makes them think that it won't be as fun as experience to take on challenges in. So what I'm doing in this video is going to talk about how the mechanics work differently in each of the different games, because it's not just a case of you cannot dodge or go prone in The Last of Us Part 1. The Last of Us Part 1 has very different combat systems than The Last of Us Part 2, even though they seem quite similar on the surface. Not only the dodge and prone, but the melee combat as a whole works differently, and the stealth works differently, the guns work differently, the weapons that you can use, explosives and so on, work differently. So I'm going to try and talk through that, hopefully demystify it a bit alongside the walkthrough that I've just produced and just released. This, I'm hoping, will encourage more people to give Last of Us Part 1 a go, because although I do agree with them that The Last of Us Part 2 is better in terms of gameplay, I don't think the gap is as wide as people think, particularly since the remake came out. The remake is essentially The Last of Us's gameplay systems refined and smoothed out a lot more than they were on the original version that came out in 2013 and 2014. So give it a chance, and you might be surprised with what you can do and the amount of fun you can have with the gameplay. So with that said, let's dive in and have a look at the gameplay systems and how they differ. One of the first and most obvious differences in terms of stealth is that Joel in The Last of Us Part 1, unlike Ellie and Abby in The Last of Us Part 2, cannot go prone, and therefore cannot do things like crawl straight up to clickers in order to be able to take them out. Now, there's two ways around that. First of all, obviously, if we walk extremely slowly, then we're in a better position to be able to take out a clicker. We still have to, as we get close, start spamming triangle in order to catch it just in time. If we walked much further, we would have died. It is a very delicate, very quiet movement that you have to do on grounded difficulty. On lower difficulties you might be able to get away with more, but I'm speaking here specifically in relation to grounded difficulty. Now, that doesn't matter too much, because with the best will in the world, we're not going to have enough shivs to take out even all of the clickers in this area, let alone in other areas when we come to grounded difficulty. Now, there's a degree to which that doesn't matter, because with the best will in the world, we're not going to have enough shivs or enough resources to craft shivs to take out even all of the clickers in this particular area that I'm using as an example, let alone in the entire game. So in my walkthrough on Grounded, for example, I don't use a shiv to kill a single clicker, other than the one at the end of this level if you do the version of the strategy that doesn't involve a brick throw distraction. So stealth in relation to clickers is not about being able to stealth kill them. We can talk about how we can kill them in terms of melee combat when we get to that, but stealth instead is more about getting around them and getting from A to B. And in that case, we don't have to be quite as quiet in terms of the area. There are plenty of parts of the area you can get away with fast crouch walking. We can use aiming and crouch walking to move fast but quiet away from enemies. And it's all about how far they are away from us. There's even parts when we're in the same level as clickers. We can get away with standing up and jogging if we know what we're doing.
Joel, over there on your left.
And then in the cases we need to, we can still shift them. We just need to take our time and be aware that we need to move slow in any case, but we need to move slower for awake clickers than we do for sleeping clickers. In terms of stealth with humans, we can actually get away with a lot more because we don't have to go prone and there's no mechanic in terms of registering our appearance in low grass. So for example, as you saw right there, we practically ran right up to this guy because he was in the process of just spawning. We avoided being seen at the window just by crouching rather than having to go prone, which we obviously can't do. And in cases like this, even when we're relatively close to them, enemies won't hear their allies getting stealth killed. And again, between areas, we can actually get away with an awful lot in terms of sprinting. It's all about knowing when and where you can do this. Because the game isn't built for prone, we also get a lot more leeway in terms of the cover the shorter walls provide. So we don't have to worry about not being prone if we go a little bit further back. So it's not obviously infinite, but for example,
hey, you hear that? Clicker. Yeah.
If we look at where Joel is right now, he should be visible. As you can see, we can see the top of his head. He should be visible. And he should definitely be visible with the searchlight, or he's not. So again, this doesn't go back. If we go back too far, we'll definitely be seen here.
Whoa, I know you saw that. Whoa.
For example. But there's a lot more leeway. Again, because we can have that prone option and because there's nothing built in to recognize or rather keep us hidden lower. So there's not much else to say in regards to that.
Don't lose him.
Just that it does change how the mechanics work somewhat.
He's not here. Spread out.
I mean, stealth is far from impossible without prone.
Right here.
Next, let's talk about melee combat, and particularly, obviously, the main thing that people will recognize as difference is the lack of a dodge. But it's actually more than that. If I was to sneak up as to this person as Ellie or Abby in part 2 and press square, I would do a strike and kill them. As Joel, I just start punching them. And that's true even if you have a melee weapon. You just start doing your normal melee attacks. There is no strike just from the virtue of being in stealth. The only way you can strike an enemy is if they're stunned, and even then it works slightly differently. So
You're gonna pay for that.
if we've stunned them with a leg shot, as you can see, then they go down to their knees, and so we can kill them. But But if we've stunned them in a different way, it doesn't quite work the same. Let's show some examples.
What about Robert?
So if I stun with the brick or bottle, again, if it was Ellie or Abby in part 2, then the next move following the stun with the brick or bottle would be a strike, which on a human would kill them. However, if I do this as Joel, it actually takes 2 hits.
What about Robert?
And that difference might seem small because you can obviously still
Fuck if I know. We'll check in with the others and come up
kill them from that. It just takes a little bit longer. But it's different than, for example, if you hit them over the head with a bottle like this. Then they're instantly on their knees and dead. So this might seem like Joel is weaker in melee combat than Ellie or Abby, but he does have one distinct advantage.
Move up.
Although Joel isn't able to dodge, he also doesn't need to dodge, because when we start hitting an enemy, you'll notice that he reels from those attacks. He doesn't at any point fail to take damage from it and then start hitting us back, which necessitates a dodge. So in effect, the fact that we can't dodge is balanced by the fact that we don't need to dodge, because the enemies, once we start hitting them, will take those blows and take that damage and go down, and they won't be able to fight back, really. The only instance when they can fight back is if they dodge our hits, which is a slightly different mechanic for part 1. So let's try and get an example. So there you see, periodically enemies will duck our swing, and we have to press triangle in order to counter that, and then be able to carry on punching them again.
The area.
That is a very rare animation. It doesn't happen every single time you fight someone flat-footed. It's just kind of periodic, and it's by no means are you forced to counter anywhere near as much as you're forced to dodge in part 2. One other quick point to mention there is that there are 2 types of enemies in part 1 in terms of melee combat. There are enemies with melee weapons and enemies without melee weapons. That distinction doesn't exist in part 2, mainly because of the dodge. In part 1, because there's the counter move, it's different. So you cannot counter an enemy with a melee weapon if you don't have one yourself. If you do have one yourself, then you can use that to counter. And that therefore changes how you approach enemies with melee weapons. On top of that, Joel has something which Abby and Ellie don't, which is momentum, whereby sprinting and meleeing comes with a lot more power than just flat-footed meleeing. As you see, it reduces the enemy to his knees a lot quicker. Allowing us to do a quick kill. And is basically unstoppable. This sprinting punch also provides an advantage against stalkers, who will push us away when we're doing flat-footed melee, but cannot do so when we're doing sprinting melee. So as you see there, the sprinting melee very quickly weakens their defenses, whereas the second we don't get a sprint and we start punching normally, they can counter and push us away. Like so. But again, if we can get a sprinting punch on them, it evens the odds. Sprinting attacks with a melee weapon are even more powerful, including against clickers. So, for example, getting 2 successive tight hits on a clicker, both on the back of a sprint, allow you to kill it in just those 2 hits. Whereas alternatively, a pipe while flat-footed takes 4 hits, which obviously puts you more at risk of being killed by other clickers if you are not able to react. It's worth being aware, again, that although the stun and strike mechanic does exist in part 1, the fact that it works differently isn't just the fact that on humans or runners it takes 2 hits on a stunned enemy to knock them down. The other difference is this. While we can stun and strike a clicker with a pipe, when we don't have a pipe, it's a very different prospect. As you can see there, because although we can get the first hit in on the clicker, we cannot get the second. If alternatively we go for the bottle smash method, that's even less effective, whereas it's more effective against humans. However, Joel does have the trump card in the form of his abilities with bricks. Namely, the brick smash. If Joel doesn't kill an enemy with it, he can even go so far as to use the brick multiple times. Like so.
I think that's it.
Good job.
I've covered this in the walkthrough, but it's just again worth mentioning that these are some of the things Joel can do that Abby and Ellie can't, to balance against the things that they can do that he can't. So, as you can see with melee combat, it's a mixed bag in terms of there's some stuff from part 2 that Joel is definitely missing or lacking, but then there is other aspects to Joel's melee combat where he is a lot more of a powerhouse as a result of what he can do, particularly when sprinting.
Hold up. I got a key for that gate.
And when using a brick. Another thing to mention briefly here is the upgrade system in Last of Us Part 1 and how different it is to Last of Us Part 2. On a surface level, it's the same in the fact that there are 3 ways to upgrade. One is with workbenches to upgrade weapons, another is with pills to upgrade Joel as a character, and another is through training manuals. However, in Part 2, the training manuals provide a new pill upgrade path. In Part 1, that's not the case. So, picking up a training manual automatically grants a specific upgrade to the character. So, in this instance, what it does is allow you to get more than one use out of a shiv. There are others that allow you to get more than one use out of an upgraded melee weapon and so forth. There are no pill upgrades associated with that. Now, on this save file, I don't have a pill upgrade tab because I haven't actually picked up any pills. However, all of the pill upgrades that you can do on Joel are available the second you have pills. Obviously, you won't be able to afford the most of them, but they are all there. There are no new ones to be earned by training manuals, so that is different. Another difference is in terms of the melee weapons upgrades. So where in Part 2, upgrading a melee weapon restores its durability and makes it more lethal. In Part 1, upgrading a melee weapon does not restore its durability, but instead adds a specific amount of hits that are instant strikes. So on a pipe, for example, if you upgrade it and it's got 3 hits left, you will get 1 hit that's instantly deadly to whoever the impact lands upon, and then 3 more normal hits. It won't restore the durability, and the rest of the hits won't have any special extra strength behind them. You can go from 1 special hit to up to 3 special hits by finding enough training manuals, but that's about it. They don't work the same. However, the durability of all the melee weapons in part 1 is more than the durability of the melee weapons in part 2, which in turn is balanced by the fact that if you're not doing sprinting attacks and instead of just doing flat-footed attacks, it takes more of them to take down an enemy, as we discussed in the melee section. And finally, where you can find holsters in part 2, you have to upgrade at a workbench to get the long or shotgun additional holster, for which you need parts. So that's basically all of the differences in upgrades between part 1 and part 2 in terms of how they work. Gun combat in The Last of Us Part 2 is also very different to that in The Last of Us Part 1. Not only in terms of the range of weapons that Joel gets versus what Ellie and Abby get. Joel has his custom revolver and El Diablo, which acts essentially the same as Abby's hunting pistol, and a short shotgun called Shorty. As well as the rifle and shotgun and bow and pistol that all of the characters get in some form or another. Obviously, Abby gets a crossbow rather than a longbow. But yeah, Joel gets 2 additional guns, shotguns. And in addition to that, they function differently, particularly on grounded. So on grounded difficulty, the revolver is a one-hit kill on any unarmored enemy. And unarmored enemies, if you shoot them outside the armor, it will also be a one-hit kill.
Where'd she run off to? He's over there. Shit.
As we can see here.
Don't let him get you. Where is she? One way or another, you gotta tell me.
In addition, all of the gunplay in part 1 is a lot slower than in part 2 in terms of the fire rates, the reload time, and even in the time it takes for Joel to switch from melee to guns. If you, for example, are punching someone and then go to shoot them to finish them off, it's a lot slower than it might be for Ellie or Abby to do that in part 2. But it's not just the revolver that gets a power upgrade on grounded difficulty.
He's over here. You're gonna pay for that.
Because the pistol takes 2 shots to kill an enemy on grounded, whereas it takes 3 on any other difficulty. And in addition, the bow, when fully drawn, is always a kill shot.
He's over there. Shit. You're dead, asshole.
Whereas in part 2, it has to be a headshot in order for it to kill on grounded, at least.
Where is she? One way or another, you gotta tell me.
As a balance to this on part 1, enemies with shotguns and rifles, and sometimes also with El Diablo guns, can kill you in one shot.
Bitch. Right there.
This applies to hard difficulty upwards. On the other hand, one other thing we can take advantage of with enemies is that they are a lot slower to react in terms of the initial alert, which allows you to run past them in certain circumstances. And also, they are far less accurate when you are running away from them, and particularly when the camera is facing away from them, both of which we can use to our advantage.
I got this.
Like so. As you can see,
your head down.
not a single hit there. And if you look at my walkthrough of the
What are we doing?
key area,
Joel, how are we
there
getting out
are
of here?
it is possible to do that no damage if you get the camera movement just right.
Stay down. I don't know how many more there are.
still haven't found the last two.
I heard one of them was a kid.
Doesn't matter. They took out a bunch of our guys.
Joel, there's
But
the
again,
I see it.
you have that initial moment of reaction, and then once they are facing away from us,
Get away from him!
a lack of accuracy if they shoot. Although they didn't actually shoot in that instance, but the point remains.
following us.
Damn it.
And the last thing to mention is the other weapons, the throwables that Joel has. So Joel's throwable explosives work differently on part 1 than part 2 as well. So let's take smoke bombs, for example. There are always smoke bombs from the beginning and don't have to be upgraded from stun bombs in the way that they do in part 1. And in addition, they don't immediately explode on impact. So for example, they will hit and give you 2 stuns effectively there. The stun from the impact and then the stun from the explosion. We then also have nail bombs, which kind of serve a dual function in the same way that pipe bombs in part 2 or trap mines in part 2 do. So they can obviously be thrown and explode when enemies are nearby, or they can be thrown or planted and then go off when investigated. And the last thing to mention, Molotovs are pretty much the same as in part 2, except they can't be upgraded, the radius, but they are already extremely powerful. And finally we have Ellie, who in part 1 plays differently both to Joel in part 1 and also to herself in part 2. So I'm using the example in Left Behind here, but I'll also cover some of it in how she works in the main game. Obviously Ellie can't melee because all of the enemies in the game are bigger than her, and if they get close they are likely to be able to take her down easily, whether they're infected or human. But she does have some things to her advantage. One of them is the bow, which, as mentioned earlier when talking about guns in general, is always a one-hit kill if fully drawn, even if it's not a headshot. Like so. And another is that, unlike Joel, a brick or bottle thrown against an enemy, including clickers, always allows her to do a strike because of her knife. And her gameplay style is very different to the others in terms of, rather than trying to do lots of stealth or lots of aggressive melee combat, fast gunplay combined with
You hear him? Over there!
quick movements back to cover when needed are the best way around as Ellie. You'll also see that enemies with guns, if they're close enough, will put their guns away to melee attack Ellie, which you can still kill you, but can also be used to your advantage.
You're gonna burn! She's out of ammo!
As you saw there, we used the fact that even though he had a gun, he was intent on meleeing us because we were close enough, and the fact that the arrow is a one-hit kill when drawn to our advantage to take him out. It is still possible to do stealth kills as Ellie. It's just worth being aware that those stealth kills are not as efficient as Harold herself or Joel or Abby.
I got you now, asshole.
And if there's another enemy in close proximity, can still lead to you being alerted.
Where the hell did you go?
Which again brings us back to the point that the main, most effective way to play as Ellie is to use her quickness. Use the fact that enemies will try and melee her when she's in close range. And use the fact that it's a lot easier to move quickly around even quite low cover
These guys want to fight.
in quite a small contained area, to be able to regain stealth or even just to gain a little surprise advantage against enemies. So while Ellie does have some of the toughest encounters both in part 1 and in the series as a whole, in particular if you reference the Left Behind final fight, in my opinion she has some of the funnest gameplay because of that speed factor and the need to be constantly moving and constantly aware of your surroundings and use a combination of different weapons and tactics in order to stay alive because of the disadvantage that she has in physical size. With all of that said, I hope that these walkthrough guides have been useful for people who are trying to take on Grounded and Last of Us Part 1 for the first time, but I also hope that, particularly when talking through how the systems of Last of Us Part 1 work and how they differ from Part 2 in ways that have different balancing aspects and have advantages and disadvantages rather than necessarily just being quote-unquote bad or worse than Part 2, will encourage more people to try it and try Grounded and try Grounded Permadeath and other challenge runs on it. It is a fun game, not just for the phenomenal story, which obviously I don't need to sing the praises of, has already been something that people have been talking about for 12 years now, but also for the gameplay, particularly in the remake, which, like I say, I think deserves more attention. So even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Part 2 challenge runner, please do consider coming to Part 1 and giving it a go for challenges and not just for story playthroughs, because it does have a lot to offer. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that's just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.